Okay, so this is more of a practical question looking at an example. So with something like a concept, would you say a stock chart is a concept? Like I just formulated it as it's a visual diagram displaying price over time for a specific, say, financial product. Um, it, it's like the Genesis visual diagram and the differentiator is the that it displays like a stock chart. Is that because it's such a minor difference? It's like it doesn't. Is that a whole new concept?
I mean, you could have a concept of charts, and you
Yeah,
could have a concept of stocks, but
yeah.
the stock chart itself is not the concept. When you
Okay,
visualize the chart, is that's not the concept per se. That's not the abstraction. I mean, that's almost just like a visual memory, where you're just going to an element maybe of a concept, a referent of a certain concept that you have. I mean, you could be like a concept chart, and then underneath that, types of charts, which are like stock charts, pie charts, bar charts, and you could have concepts in that sense. That what is a stock chart is a chart which represents stock prices, and I'm thinking of it that way. It's not the stock chart itself. You wouldn't say, "Oh, that's the concept," or like I'm imagining the chart and that's the concept. But
yeah.
what it refers to when you say stock chart, you're referring to a specific concept, your concept of stock charts.
Okay,
You might want to call it two concepts, like stock is one and chart is another. But that's a nitpick. That's one. I think you go either way. You can call it a concept though, in that sentence.
okay,
You want to keep in mind that you use a concept as an abstraction that refers to something. Like it points to it. Like when you say dog, it should point in your memory to then memories of dogs or what dogs do and
yeah.
things like that.
And so in this case, we can just have one concept being chart, and then stock, I guess, is an adjective adding information, and it's not adding that much more information.
Well,
Um,
I mean, in the same way a proposition is made up of multiple concepts, you might be able
Sorry,
to
what? A
say
proposition is what?
a proposition is multiple concepts, like
Okay.
a sentence, like the sky is blue. I mean, that's multiple concepts.
Hmm.
Under Rand's idea, that wouldn't be a concept. That the sky is blue is not a concept. It's a set of concepts.
Okay. Okay.
That you don't have a concept for the whole thing. That it's multiple concepts. And according to Rand, she probably would say that stock chart is just like combining two concepts. They're not necessarily a new concept, but
Okay.
that's almost trivial. Like you could say it's one concept though, because I would say that compound words like that are one concept, or compound things like that are single concepts. So yeah, I would say stock chart is when you say that you're referring to when you have the concept of stock chart, you're referring to a type of chart. Like you have chart as the more maybe the wider concept, and then stock chart is beneath that. And same way you get like pie charts.
Yeah.
Like your first introduction to charts might be a pie chart when you're like in first grade. But now that you've grown older, you've learned all these kinds of other charts that like not all stock charts are charts, but not all charts are stock charts. That kind of thing.
Yeah. The reason my motivation in asking this question is that I have noticed that uh, I mean, this is the field that I know, but like in markets or finance, there might be a lot of creation of words for, I guess you would call them concepts, but I don't know if they should be. They just make like, and it's also I'm asking not just because I'm like fussy about should this be a concept or not be a concept, but I mean like when I'm working, I'm just wondering when I should create like a concept for something that I see, like to explain some pattern of behavior, like at what point. This is why I'm asking. It's sort of getting my head around when I then create my own concept so I can name something rather than describe the whole set of behaviors that are happening, like,
Yeah,
um,
Rand does get into that further in. Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, like a concept is usually just to integrate information that if you're putting together relevant information, like you probably should have a concept of it. And
Right.
what she refers to as the crow epistemology, that it condenses things so you can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Condensing it shouldn't make it harder. Condensing it shouldn't make it more difficult. It should make it easier to think about something about it. That crow epistemology being that she was remembering an experiment with crows, which she may have misremembered with the idea, just to illustrate a principle that, say, a crow can observe 3 people walk into a forest and then see 2 people walk out, and then they won't recognize that one more person didn't walk out. Like they don't have a way of condensing the information because they get like overwhelmed or they can't really identify it. So like you want to combine information so that you can recall it easier. So you can actually recall 3 people going in, 3 people going out of a forest, and being able to hold that information in your head by having it condensed enough. It's not like you're seeing like imagine a swarm of bees flying into a forest and flying out. Would you know how many went? You would know a lot went in, a lot came out, but you can't really think clear enough about it because like there's some notion that came out of amounts that came out and in, but it's unclear because it's so uncondensed and unruly. Like you can't really think about it.
Right.
But
So that I think the key then, based on what you're saying, is that there is some, you said like relevant information. I think you used that word. We used the word relevant.
yes,
Like that in everything, in the whole set of behaviors you see, let's go with the swarming bees. There is the relevant information is that there is a set of many bees behaving together in a similar way. And that captures some aspect of reality that you want to integrate so you can track it. Is
yeah,
that a
something
formulation
like
that
that.
makes
Or think
sense?
about it. Yes, you have the concept of a swarm.
Yeah,
I mean, that can condense into like, oh, now I can handle what I'm thinking about,
got it.
even if I might perceptually not be able to handle it. Like you can't keep track of every single bee and say what's going on. You need some kind of abstraction of that. Like you need to idea that the concept of swarm. But also relevance can also do is just if it's is it practical? Is it something you need to function? Is something you need to think? It's not just practical is relevant here. That part of concept information is necessary to think. It's necessary for your rationality. And being those things are practically important for your life. It's both practical and theoretically important. Like it's not something like it's not like concept development is just some fancy technique you learned that has no real application to anything, and that's supposed to be divorced from practical use.
Okay.
But Rand is trying to say, like, well, concept development has practical use, and we can think about it carefully and precisely.
If I what was I going to ask you? Yeah, so but the key here is relevant, meaning like for me, let's say I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so my concept of soap is thing that cleans hands and removes germs which cause illness, which doctors say is bad, or germs which are bad, which cause illness. Because I have no first hand perception of germs, right? I know what illness is, and I know that people say that germs cause illness. So my concept of soap is way less precise than, say, a doctor's concept of soap and germs. But for my life,
Well,
would you say it's like a relevant, the kind of, I'm getting it on like a lower level? Is that fun? Is that sort of the part of what relevant captures?
no, that's not quite what I mean. When you're saying that, I would distinguish between a concept versus a definition. A definition is not the same as the concept.
Mm,
So, yes, a doctor may have a more precise definition for their field. That when you're talking about soap, you have to mean something in particular about soap as a doctor, or maybe compared to a chemist in a manufacturing plant. They
Yeah.
might think of soap defined in a different way. But you're all referring to the same thing. All your definitions might be a little different based on why you're using the concept and how and what place it has in your life. But soap is a concept that we all hold here, that we're all referring to the same thing, that we actually do have the same idea in mind, the same concept in mind, even if our definition is not exactly the same. So yes, they have more understanding than you, but by relevant, I mean, like, can it be integrated with your information? Does it in some way help your thinking? Is it some way necessary for your thinking? So I'll give another example of being more what I mean of relevant concept, which is an example Rand talks about. Say you saw a woman that was like 6 feet tall, wore red stiletto heels, and had purple hair and blue eyes. Would you have a concept for that? Like, you don't see that very often. Like, you even need a concept for that. It's not really relevant or important.
Okay, I
And if
get
you need to refer to her, you can use those
it.
individual concepts, but
Yeah,
you don't create a new concept for the whole thing,
got it.
for the whole person. And that's more
And
what I mean by relevance.
that I maybe I didn't explain it well, but that's what I was trying to capture, I think. What I was trying to capture was, yeah, so I mean, given what you've said, I understand. And this goes back to a discussion I was in previously on the forums, but it's like you can have I think someone said intensive knowledge about so like about televisions. Um, like you know about everything in it, but you still have the same concept. Like, you know, I'm referring, not have, you're referring to the same thing, just someone has more intensive knowledge about the entity, which is a different idea than is the concept relevant or not. But what I was trying to capture, which I think is, which I didn't maybe explain well, is yes, like, um, you know, maybe there are things that I think about and use day to day that someone else won't. And so the question is, do I then create a concept for it? For example, there's someone called Mel Robbins, and she has like the 5 second rule, which is like this uh, little trick she uses to try and motivate action. So like count down 5 seconds, then do what you wanted to do before your motivation evaporates. And she's got some other concept called like the knowledge action gap, which is, um, you know, like sometimes we want to do something, but the issue is we don't have knowledge to do it. And so that causes like us not to take action, something like that. I don't know. But my question is like, when you're, you know, stuff like that, if you start thinking about your day-to-day life like that, are those things concepts? Like when you're naming these kind of methods and
Um,
little tricks from self-help or I mean, that's one example, the things from self-help, and you're trying to frame your life in those terms. Are you then like viewing it conceptually, or is that something else? Does that make sense? I'm still kind
I
of
think so.
groping for words and like
I think
trying to.
so. So those, I would say, if there's more than two words, it's not a concept. It could be, say, like something more like a proposition,
Okay.
just as in multiple concepts. Like I was saying about compound words, like I would argue compound words still count, but
Yeah.
definitely more than two, it's not a concept.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's a principle. You could call it a rule. You could call it something like that, but it's not itself a concept
Oh,
because
okay.
you're not referring to like a thing. You're referring to a bunch of concepts, but you're talking about it in a coherent, clear way. And
Yeah.
that's not really what we're talking about here as far as concepts.
Hmm.
Concepts are like just this contained thing which tell you information that are, it's almost a matter of if you think about something enough, you need a concept to consolidate your thinking. Like if you only saw one dog in your entire life, you don't really need a concept dog. Like you could use your other concepts to talk about it or things like that. Or if you're researching something, like trying to understand something in finance, it's like, oh, here's this idea. I see the idea again. I ran into the idea again. and you run into it enough that you give it a name
Oh,
and
okay.
you identify what it is. Like, I'm referring to this in reality. And you could pick a word for it, and you could take the observations about it. Like, what are characteristics of this thing I'm looking at? What's
Yeah.
essential about it? What makes it similar to other things? What makes it different?
Yeah.
And then from there, you can like, oh, why? You make a definition. Things like, and then you pick a word. It's like there's a concept.
Okay.
Like whatever Darwin observed for evolution, like, he started out with just saying, here's a thing I see in this animal, in this instance of a finch, and here's another instance. And then after seeing it many times, it became, there was a point to using a new concept here, that he had to create a concept evolution to integrate all these ideas and observations into a single thing. So he doesn't need to talk endlessly about the way finches mate and gather and their isolation on an island and mutations. Like, you can condense all of that into evolution, and you can call that a concept. Like, that's much more complex and also relevant and important.
Okay.
Something
I
you run into enough.
I understand now. Yeah. So if I see some particular thing repeated over and over, something that captures uh like a certain set of behaviors or something like that, then it's worth trying to form a concept for it. Um,
Yeah,
okay, cool. I need to think about that more, but that's good.
yeah, that's more what I mean by relevant. Which, and
Yeah.
of course, when you're younger, it's much, you'll see a lot more things that are like relevant. Like, you'll see books a lot. So you'll see, oh, that's a book. It's easier for that concept because it's better than saying, referring to the square thing filled with many pages that I don't know how to read yet or something. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, cool. Um, but you still need to get to the point where you're seeing that thing, that or that repeated behavior or that repeated phenomena, because I think maybe that's what's difficult. Maybe seeing the thing repeated. Like, okay, I'm thinking in my terms with my work. Like, if I see a set of behaviors, I have to see it first before I form the concept. And if there's so much information, sometimes doing that is what's actually hard, um, rather than naming the process of seeing the thing in reality is what's I think maybe hard. Like seeing the pattern, right? Observing evolution through lots of differences and similarities, like that.
yeah, yeah, I see what you mean.
Where does
Uh,
yeah, sorry.
I was thinking, yeah, I mean, I think you're right to say that it might be hard if you're just starting with that always. I think you can even approach it differently sometimes. Like, if you understand concept development enough, you can start doing fancier things. Like, could you develop a theory before any observations and have like a pre-concept or something like that, like an early idea before you validate it or anything? Just say, oh, well, I'm going to test this, see if it does line up with anything in reality, see if once I create this idea, can I identify multiple things in reality? And then obviously like, oh yeah, this is, it's not just some thought I had, but now I can start validating into like a valid concept that refers to things, which might not always be an advisable way to go about doing it. But the idea with this is that regardless of where you start, to validate it to be a valid concept that isn't just some off the wall idea, if you want to validate it and say it's a genuine concept, you'll need to have these observations that it still needs to observe things in reality. It's not like you came up with a concept, but there's nothing it refers to. Like, you could easily come up with a math concept and say like called magical numbers. What are they? I say they're these. Like, I define it this way. And then you go about like, does this exist in reality? Do I see more than one instance of it? Does it exist? Is it relevant to me? Or am I trying to make a concept like that name for like a 6 foot tall one with purple hair, blue eyes, and red stilettos, you can just call her like Stiletto or something, like name her that, but they call that a concept, but it's not really referring to anything. It seems like it'd be an invalid concept because it's not important, it's not relevant, it doesn't do any work for you.
Yeah. You're talking about methods of observing
Yes.
phenomena in reality then, like starting with an idea and then looking for evidence of that. I think that stuff, I mean, that I'm interested in that stuff because I think you kind of do that. We do that. I've observed myself. You do that. Well, I do that kind of like I'm assuming most people do as well. There's some kind of automatic reasoning process. Not automatic in the sense that, like it's there from birth, but there's some kind of process. I know I've gone through, like I've caught myself reasoning about something, like something I've observed and go, okay, if it's doing this, then I think it'll do this other thing. But the actual process of reasoning that way is maybe based on a mistake. So there is something to improving those methods of trying to observe phenomena and then formulating theories around them that you could apply to anything. I'm interested in that. I don't know how to pursue that further, but that's definitely,
Yeah, that's methods of thinking, which we've always talked about many times, but yes, that is the very interesting thing.
Intuition pumps, you said. I was going to
Yeah,
read
that
that.
was one book.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in a way, what I'm describing is that going back and forth that Peacock described, like you have a definition, you have the referent, you kind of go look between the two to validate your concepts and reduce them and whatnot. That's the part of the process of concept development. I mean, you can develop a concept that's bad, of course. It's just saying these are the valid concepts. These are what concepts should be used for in a prescriptive sense. But concept development is just the integration of your observations or integration of perceptual information.
Yeah.
Or abstractions of abstractions.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's see what else I got here. Okay, this is more of I don't know, it's just a random thing I was thinking about relating to concepts. So concepts are they're like a lever on the world in that we can think of more things than we normally can. We can like grab more information, like you gave the example of the swarm and the crows. But then how do you think, this is more a question of psychology actually, so it's sort of off topic, but how do you think it actually relates to, say, performance in, like, for example, in sports or I'm thinking of trading specifically, so people who like buy and sell, because I find it hard to, I mean, there's a lot of things I observe that I see, like, and I wonder, do concepts actually improve anything at all? Like driving a car, for example, or social skills. Um, do you know what I'm getting at? Like, I'm wondering if concepts play any role in that at all. Or that's just like a purely associational, subconscious, using muscle memory type thing. Like a lot of these are important skills too, like driving, social skills and being able to communicate. There's components of communication I know that are conscious and so on, but and then trading as well, So I just thought about.
It
Do you have any thoughts
depends.
on?
For things that are more like physical activity, maybe early on in your learning,
Yeah.
concepts might. Once you've mastered it, probably not. It's sort of like they become habituated over time, that you no longer really even need to think about it. But do you need concepts to get to that point? I really don't know. That's hard to say. But it might help your training. I could put it that way.
Yeah.
That you can use concepts to put yourself in a situation where you can improve these skills faster than otherwise. I could say it that way, an indirect way. Your concepts can play a role. Just indirect as in creating your environment in a way that supports your development.
Yeah, maybe it's also a thing of like, you know how David said something like, from when we're young, the concepts are named and things are labeled and they're pointed out. We don't ever have to form our own concepts because they're pointed out, and then we observe someone points the thing in
Yeah,
reality to us. And so maybe there's something here too, because if you just put someone on a tennis court, or let's go with a trading example since that's what I'm actually concerned about. But like, there's so much information. Um, like unless someone points out the specific things that are relevant, it's pretty hard to, I think it could be pretty hard to know what you need to look for. So in that sense, like someone is giving you the concepts and then showing you where to look, and then obviously then it's up to you to see is that a thing or not. Um,
yeah,
so that might be something there, but okay, we don't know. It's
yeah. I mean, that seems very hard to answer.
yeah,
I
okay.
think you need like a whole essay
Oh,
on that.
okay.
That's kind of
All right.
absolutely. I think that's a good question to think
Yeah.
about,
Okay.
but I won't really put that to the side.
Okay, let's put it to
That's
the
a good
side.
question.
I'll ask some of this later. Anyway, that I think that's all my random questions. So we can go to OPA.
Yeah. So just continuing where you left off, or do you
Yeah,
not care where you go? Okay.
yeah. We'll just
Let's
continue
just go
from.
in order. Okay, first you're asking
That's that quote about
savage is not language.
prove something by means of unconsciousness. Like, uh,
Yeah,
what she means is that you just can't prove it, right? Because proof relies on consciousness. That's what it's just a kind of cool way of
well,
saying. Because I was confused when I read that. I was like, huh?
it's more like that's why it's an axiom to axiomatic, because to refute it, you have to use the concept. You have to use the very thing you're trying to refute. To
Yeah,
argue against consciousness, you must be conscious. To argue against existence, you're using existence to deny existence,
yeah.
or using consciousness to deny consciousness. So she's talking about the inherent lack of logic in that statement.
Oh,
When
okay.
Rand says that, like, and yes, in a sense, you can't prove it because proof relies on these sort of things. That proof is, yeah, like you can't prove existence without using existence. Like it'd be impossible.
Okay. So it's more like a literary way to make it obvious, basically.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, could you ever imagine saying existence might not exist because, like, what you have to not exist to argue that, to prove that it doesn't exist? Like, in which case you're not making any argument. It's just
Yeah, okay.
incoherence.
Okay. Cool.
That's what he says when a savage who has not learned to speak talks, declares, like that's almost a contradiction in itself. Like, if you can't speak, how can you then you make arguments?
Yeah.
Like you need to speak to make arguments.
Yeah. Got it. Cool. Well, it's easy. Me.
That's what she says. Rand would say there. I guess Peacock in here is saying they're inescapable. Nothing can be, no conceptual knowledge can be gained apart from these principles.
Where are you reading that from?
The next part, next line down here.
Ah, yeah, right, right. It relates,
So it
yeah.
follows right into that. They're directly connected.
And so when we speak of them as principles, remember when we had a session, like we had a conversation 2 weeks ago, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we said principles are guides. Part of what makes a principle is it's fundamental, and then it's also a guide to moral action. So in this context, if we talk about axioms as no,
No, maybe you misunderstood. They're not necessarily moral, but moral principles are like that. Right? Any principles like would condense information that's fundamental and important to thinking or talking about this idea.
so in this case, actually, now that I think of it, I guess maybe we put aside moral, but it guides choice, anything that's open to choice. So in this case, it's still
Yes.
the knowledge, the conceptual knowledge of the axioms, where they're called principles, because it can still guide choice, but in this case, it's choice in thinking. Would you say that's a logical sort of?
Apart from these principles. Yeah, I think that makes sense to think of them as like guiding choice, guiding thought. I mean, ultimately, thought is about choices. Like you're deciding what's rational, or you're deciding what different things. You're making choices always along the way. You can't have principles without choices. So I think that's a fair way to think about it.
Okay, cool. This is more just a question I'm curious about. I don't know if this is a thing or not, but he says like, the concept of entity is an axiomatic concept, which is presupposed by all subsequent human cognition, although it is not a basic axiom. Are there like such a thing as basic and non-basic axioms? Like what?
Based on this reading, yeah. Based on what he said there, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I would say axiomatic in the sense that any cognitive thought rests on entity, that you can't have conceptual thought without
So,
or at least it's hierarchically primary. Like in a hierarchy, entity is the foundation of all concepts. Like you need some notion or concept of it. Whether or not you form the concept first, it's fundamental to, or even like the foundation of the logical structure of concepts. But I guess he's saying basic axiom is probably more like a basic axiom might be just more like what's fundamental to the hierarchy of existence of everything. In that sense, more so.
okay, I got something from what you said. I don't know if I'm right, but tell me, like, so axioms aren't always self-evident. Like for example, entity isn't like well, I don't know actually now that I'm saying that, but
that would be self-evident though.
yeah, okay.
These are things that are just in and of itself self-evident, that you see an entity that's self-evident. There's nothing else to say about it except that it's an entity. There's nothing else to say about existence other than that's existence. So you can expand on what you mean when you say it, but there's nothing else to existence. It's not like you can break it down further.
Yeah.
And because you can't break it down further, it's like anytime you think, it's there implicitly.
Okay.
It's unavoidable in that sense. So you can never escape reality, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So I was trying to maybe this distinction between the basic and non-basic is not that important.
I don't think so.
Yeah, okay, cool. The main point is that there are axioms which are things that we need to think. But all our thinking depends on if we want to think, we use the axioms. Basically, that's the
as concepts, the axiomatic concepts. Yes, they're foundations of thought, which you could different than just existence itself, which is still axiomatic. But yeah, you have the idea. Yes.
Okay, cool.
An entity would be self-evident here because, like, whenever you refer to anything, that's an entity. You can't not refer to something. Like, say a concept refers to nothing, that would be incoherent. So you're always referring to an entity when you're thinking. In other words, you need entities to think conceptually. Otherwise, you won't be thinking at all.
Right.
So it's self-evident at all times. Like literally any concept you can think of, entity is in there somewhere.
The question I had is sort of in the next one anyway, so related to this.
Sure.
The corollary. I don't know how to say that.
Corollary.
Maybe that's American pronunciation.
Maybe you said the Australian
it's
way.
gonna sound like it.
I don't know.
How do I say it again?
I say corollary.
Corollary. We'll just go with that because I don't even know what it is in Australian pronunciation. So, all right, corollary. This was something that I was like, let's see. What? Oh, wait, no, maybe this is not related. But actually, the question was, I did have a question about like how do you, like maybe the basic and non-basic is the distinction is one of, is it a corollary or not?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, remember, like, so the previous question, which I just crossed out, was like, what's this
Yeah.
distinction he's going on about, basic and non-basic?
Yeah.
Maybe he was just referring to corollaries. Because the title of this chapter is causality as a corollary of identity. And identity is the axiom, right? But causality is an axiom too. So maybe that's what he means. Like you said, when he means basic, it's like basic things of existence, identity, and consciousness. And non-basic is anything that is I don't really get the jump from corollary to non-corollary to corollary, but it's still like, I think maybe that's what he means actually, now that I'm...
Yeah, it's hard for me to understand that one too. Corollary just seems like, or like just that it follows from.
Yeah, okay.
That just saying identity doesn't necessarily mean you've identified causality, but it's as fundamental as identity in a way. Like if something has an identity, it necessarily has causal power of some sort.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not real. It wouldn't exist. I mean, that's in that sense, it's a corollary, but it might not necessarily be the most basic thing, or might, yeah, it more like follows from than it is the first thing you observe. Although I mean, it's arguable, but they're almost like indivisible, I would almost say. But yes, it's a bit hard to understand. I just think of it in terms of just it follows from.
Okay. Cool.
That by making claims of identity, Rand is necessarily making claims about causality.
So, sorry, say that again.
Like by making claims about identity, there are direct implications on causality.
Yep. Got it.
On my notes I have here, I just wanted to add something. I think Peacock phrased it. I think it's a paraphrase. These are axiomatic concepts and are not subject to definition, as the reference can only be specified ostensively. Grasping these concepts is implicit, since they are implicit in all facts and in all knowledge. So you can just point at it, but you don't really create a definition. You don't define existence. You just point at it. It's that. That's existence.
Right.
You don't really say existence is. You might put it into something like a definition, just a way to describe, but
yeah,
it's not a definition.
Yeah.
You're not
what would the
comparing it to
genus
something
be?
else. Exactly.
How would you what would it integrate it?
There is, and that is the claim. Like, and Peacock is making that clear. Yes, it is true. There is no definition there. And I'm not going to try to claim that there is. It's just, it's not there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't create any chaos or any other issues. I mean, he's saying they're ostensive. You refer to it, you point to it. That's it. It's fine. That works great.
Yeah. Remember we talked about last session when I was trying to figure out I was talking about concepts and I was getting caught up on them because I wanted to like understand everything precisely. And you said, go to the ones that do the most work, and rationality was one you named as one that does the most work in objectivism. And do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so where do you think these axioms would sit? Like, because they're ostensive, are they basic in the sense that they're implicit, but they don't do a lot of work? Like, it doesn't take that much to get them. Do you reckon that makes sense to say that?
It does to me. I could see. It depends what you mean by work. I mean, in a way, they work.
Well, you tell
all
me.
the
You're the one who
time.
said it.
Yeah, in a sense, they work all the time. Because they're always there. They're never avoiding. They're there.
Yeah.
I meant more like in the sense of the cognitive sense. Like, are you thinking in terms of existence and identity? Are you thinking about that? I mean, by using the word rationality, we can do a lot of work because we're both, it includes a lot, understanding of a lot of things,
Yeah.
but it gets at most of these complex integrations that objectivism is trying to make or use.
Yeah.
That is doing a lot of work because you've included all the important things like existence, identity, and consciousness. That's there implicitly, validated in
Knowledge,
part of it.
context, certainty, volition, choice, all
Yeah,
those as well, right? So
yeah,
that's,
and
I
it's
can see.
contained when we say
Okay.
rationality. So when you say rationality, you can understand that we're referring to those things too. So it's a way to be able to think more efficiently about the whole system. Yeah, you could say that existence is always doing work in everything you think of, but it might not be the thing you're working with directly. It's there, but not what your main thing that you're using. Like you
Okay.
need to use your tools. Like I mean, if you're using a hammer, you're just thinking about the hammer. You're not thinking about everything it's been made out of, or how it got there, or why like atoms are inherent in everything. It's just you use the hammer because you integrate it all, like metaphorically speaking, you put it all together. Now you're just working with your hammer.
Yeah.
Like say hammering down your concepts in the sky into the ground. Like take them from floating abstractions, nail them into the ground. And that's kind of how I see as the work of rationality. It's your main tool in philosophy and objectivism in particular. Like your hammer concepts to reality, hammer things with certainty, hammer things with precision. So as a metaphor, I think that's what I mean by rationality does a lot of work.
And to add my understanding that now that you're saying all that, I've been thinking about it. I guess that, yeah, I can see how those axioms they're implicit, but they're not necessarily, they don't require that much cognitive effort. Like, okay, existence, this thing in front of me, identity, this thing as opposed to that thing, consciousness. Okay, how am I saying all these things? That's consciousness. Like, but then rationality requires me to, yeah, think about like, okay, what is knowledge? What does that relate to? Is this knowledge? Is this not? What is certainty? Context? When does that, like, all those, if you get all those concepts and they're all related, like one, it's really difficult because I'm struggling through some of that stuff in the one of the chapters in OPAR now, and I can see what you're saying. So because it connects and relates so many different things that are fundamental to thinking, then it requires a lot of thinking itself to make sure you have the concept and the related concepts. And so that the amount of cognitive effort for that stuff is enormous. Just given the questions that I've got that I wrote
Is
down for the chapter
right.
reason as well. Like, so yeah, I can see. Does my added perspective kind of confirm what you're? Is that sort of what you're getting at too?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, cool.
That sounds really accurate. It's a
All
good way
right,
to put it.
awesome, cool. So I do get it, which is good. um, This is a random little question that I threw. What he says, the law of causality does not state that every entity has a cause. Some of the things commonly referred to as entities do not come into being or pass away, but are eternal. Example, the universe as a whole. He says some. So what else is there that doesn't come into being or pass away?
I wouldn't say time is an entity. It's more like it's just a concept. But well, I don't know about enough about physics to really say for sure. But I don't know exactly what he's referring to.
Oh,
Let me just
okay.
think for a second if I can think of an example. Um, yeah, I don't know how to answer this one.
Okay, that's cool. Out of curiosity, has there been much thought done about time and not time from like this study of this specialized, like physics studying time, but then what about philosophy studying the concept of time just from just from basic observations and not like anything beyond that?
I've seen it talked about.
Yeah.
It's nothing I've noticed that often, but
Okay.
it is a thing.
Okay.
It's very narrow, but heard of some papers about it. I don't have any to mention. I wasn't even that interested in them, but I
Yeah,
know
okay.
they're out there.
All right, cool.
I mean, the closest thing to things that do not pass away is just, I could think of like existence or itself. I don't know if I'd call that an entity. That's the universe is an entity. I don't know. But assuming that you want to call that an entity, that would be eternal. It doesn't. And then maybe some things with, I can't think of anything else you could be referring to.
Okay. Well, we can just skip it.
Yeah, next thing.
All right, we're actually getting through a lot. So we'll be done with the reality chapter. That's my so this is in the section existence as possessing primacy over consciousness. Let's
Mhm.
see what this is probably a more psychology questions. Let me just have a quick look. So um okay, I mean I could ask you this without even reading that section. So like, he gives an example of people not formulating or not putting primacy of existence in conceptual terms and then making some error. Like he talks about a guy who sees the volcano and then um, he just remains frozen and chance. But it's not, in his case, he just hasn't reached the stage of making a firm distinction between consciousness and existence. So it's sort of like advocating for the need to put those things in conceptual terms, so to prevent error. And I was curious if, like, I don't know, because I mean, I understand what he's saying, but I'm just, when I try to think of, like, can I think of someone I know or some situation where someone, or myself even, where I've made some mistake because of actually, you know what? I can think of one. I can think of one to start. Do you know when I was ages ago, when I was younger, much younger, and I watched the movie The Matrix, I tried to bend the spoon after the movie. I was like looking at the spoon and trying to bend it, and I was like, so I guess I can't bend the spoon. So maybe that's, an example of what happens. Like, it wasn't like I can bend the spoon, but maybe there is a thing of like, because I never formulated any of that conceptually, like it wasn't even an option.
Mm,
I just thought of an example. That was one example, but I'm curious if there are more.
I'm thinking this, as far as the primacy of consciousness, it's really just anything to do with not looking at the facts of reality. I mean, I'm not sure if that your example really would be an example of that. I mean, primacy of consciousness would be, say, like thoughts or abstract thinking as primacy over all of existence, that your feelings do, or at least on a psychological level, your feelings matter more, or just your initial impression matters more, that you're not looking at the world, you're just reacting to the world in a way. Well, that's why she mentioned, he mentioned, I guess Peacock wrote this, that he mentioned an ostrich. I mean, stick your head in the sand. It's like, oh, I don't see it. It went away now. If I can't see it, it's not real. Just that kind of thing.
That's that would be an implicit primacy of consciousness premise.
Yeah, I mean, some people might even hold it explicitly, which there aren't many philosophers who have, but the philosopher of Berkeley pretty much believed that the abstract world was more had primacy over existence. That concepts, ideas, the immaterial world is the true nature of things, or at least is more has control over the material world. So in a way that literally, for him, since there is no literal immaterial world, it would be that primacy of consciousness has taken hold, that his ideas are almost more important than reality. That
Yeah,
if he thinks about it correctly, then reality would conform correctly, or
yeah,
something to that effect.
yeah. Okay.
Whether or not he realizes it is besides the point, as much as when consciousness it comes first, bad things happen. And Peacock will be claiming here that essentially the bad things that happen is that you've blinded yourself to reality. Is what happens when you do that.
Yeah, I understand. I was just thinking now as you're saying that. I guess it doesn't even matter if you've like, well, in Peikoff's example of the man running from the volcano, maybe explicit formulation of primacy of existence helps because you can refer back to it. But in a sense, maybe in modern civilization, it doesn't matter because let's say most people have it, they can still choose to ignore it. That's what you can like. That's the whole idea of the ostrich, right? Like he knows something, even though the ostriches don't actually do that. But putting aside that point, like the idea is that I can have like primacy of existence explicitly formulated, but I can still choose to put my head in the sand. Like I'll go no if a feeling comes up, and then I just ignore something, and then I'm acting on a premise implicitly of a primacy of consciousness. Then, right? I haven't. So it doesn't even,
Yeah,
does it make sense what I'm saying? Like it almost doesn't matter. Like if you've got it, you can still ignore it. Just even if you have it explicitly, you can still ignore it. In this case, just having it explicitly is more something that helps when you're moving from a certain stage of civilized development to another. Like it helps you not pray to the gods or whatever to get rain.
mhm. I mean, like primacy of consciousness could be like, say, a Christian who's really into the religion, thinking that um, it won't matter what they do as long as God forgives them, and they know God will forgive them. I'm not even saying that's even any Christians really even do that, but I'm sure there's some Christian out there who would commit sins, but it's like, oh, God will forgive me. It's almost like that,
Yeah.
like my conscious will that I'm a sinner or that I didn't mean to do it is enough to absolve me of my sins. But in a
Yeah.
way, like, and if they really believed it, like, they're only believing in God in a way as to avoid the reality of things. That their conscious feelings or their mere consciousness comes first, and reality is doesn't. They don't care what reality is as long as reality is what comports their
But
consciousness.
I mean, in that case, it is a primacy of consciousness, regardless if you believe in God and you act on it, right? Because it's just the God is the
Right.
consciousness. So it's,
Yeah, or
yeah.
just like consciousness is the fundamental, which is it's insane.
I,
Like
I
at a deep level.
I think where it's complicated here is that a lot of people now believe in like, and there is something to this, like I guess you could call it primacy of consciousness over body, of like, oh, you have an illness because you had an emotional repression, or that I've heard
Yes.
that a lot, that kind of thing, and like, it's not.
Yes.
It's like it's not that there's nothing to it. Like I'm pretty sure there is research done on, like if you're very stressed, you're more vulnerable to getting an illness and that kind of thing. And so, but there's more of that now. Like um, if I believe it, I'll make it happen. If I just repeat it to myself every day in the morning, like I am a great person, I am a great person, I will become a great person, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. I don't know if that's primacy of consciousness, but
It might be. I mean, that is almost like the secret, that book. I
yeah,
mean, I
that's
would
what I
say
would
that's
think. That's
primacy
what I
of
mean. Yeah, that kind
consciousness.
of thing. Yeah.
That's primacy of consciousness.
But that's a mixed bag because there are different messages in that. I'm aware of
True.
there's definitely like just imagine a gold chain and a gold chain would appear on your neck. But there's also like
Yeah.
um the subconscious suggestion or whatever it is where you repeat things and so I don't know, it's hard like it's a bit messier with
Yeah. I see what you mean. I mean, it can be complicated, but that's the most essentialized way to think of it, I think. I
yeah.
think it almost always will be primacy of consciousness. There might be an example you can come up with, but for the most part, that's what I mean, like wishing things were so, or just denying things. I would almost say it's more of a psychological phenomenon than necessarily just you frame it as your beliefs. It's more like you can either have an attitude towards reality or not.
Sorry, I didn't follow that bit. It's more
You're
what's more of a psychological phenomenon than
well, I'd phrase it more like primacy of existence or primacy of consciousness seem to me more like psychological attitudes. Like you have a feeling, like are you oriented towards reality or are you not oriented towards reality? Is your thinking oriented to reality, taking the facts, observing things as they are, Or is your orientation more towards, I'm going to look into my consciousness to find the truth of existence? Like, I'm only going to look into consciousness. I'm going to ignore facts and reality itself.
But everything has a psychological component. Like, aren't you just talking
Right.
about the emotional, like
Right.
someone will have an explicit premise and then there'll be a psychological component to that. Like, when do they act on
Yeah.
that premise? When is it subconsciously, in what context does it come up?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well,
okay.
that sounds fine.
Um, let's see if there's anything else here that was relevant. Um, Oh, okay. So I was just trying to. This is more psychology and interest, but I'll pass it by you, and then we can skip it if you reckon it's irrelevant or not no point going over. But I was sort of trying to work out like, okay, if I have a philosophy and I have all these different premises and some are contradicting or conflicting, like sometimes I'll act on the implicit premise of primacy of consciousness. I was wondering if you think it might be something like if you formed a viewpoint of reality or the world just without much thinking and it's just subconsciously accumulated in whatever way, then maybe it's a question of if it's activated in one context and not another, you can then act on it. Like maybe in some contexts you act on primacy of consciousness, and in others you act on primacy of existence. It just depends on, like when you're in different contexts, different subconscious associations come up. So maybe that's how it works when you have a patchwork of different philosophical ideas. Like what drives you is just completely dependent on the context you're in, because that'll activate different premises. Do you reckon that's probably more a hypothesis than an explanation? But I was just curious about that.
I would say it's not any different than when we talked about how do you judge if somebody was immoral or moral.
Right.
Yeah, there's no absolute answer, and
Yeah.
there's almost always going to be some mix of it. And
Right.
the passage by Peacock, he has picked more of like the distinct images of like somebody making prayers to make the volcano stop versus the man who recognizes what's happening and runs away from the volcano. I mean, those are very stark contrasts, but
Yes.
of course, most things in life aren't like that.
That's true.
So I wouldn't go any deeper than that, but it's something to wonder about. But the rest you could leave aside for that.
Okay. Cool. Um. Oh, this is going back to this basic, non-basic thing. Um. Yeah. So it's so um it's an axiom because it's only something you can like there's no way you only explain it, you're not really defining it, you're just explaining something that you ultimately can only point to ostensively, like look, when I close my eyes and open them there are still things there, and that kind of thing, right? That's what he means by it's an axiom.
Yeah, or elaboration of the axioms. You're just elaborating on what existence is. That well, it's existence is what's there when you close, what's still there when you open and close your eyes. Or
Oh, okay, got it.
basically, it's there regardless of your feelings, and that's
So
basically
you're
the idea.
continuing to put them in conceptual terms. That's all that's happening. But that you're describing something that's ostensive. You're describing, there's nothing more to say. You're just trying to put more and more conceptual terms around them so you can philosophize about them. That's basically what's happening,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. Um, this is back to, I can get rid of this because this is just back to the question before about like different premises activated in different contexts. So we'll just skip it. Um, yeah, this bit. Okay. This is the section on the metaphysically given as absolute. Um, as soon as one says about any such fact, it is just that much. The whole objectivist metaphysics is implicit. If the fact is, it is what it is. The law of identity is lawful, inherent in the identities of the relevant entities, the law of causality. It is independent of consciousness of anyone or everyone's belief and feelings, the primacy of existence. Such a fact has to be. No alternative is possible. If such a fact is, then within the relevant circumstances, it is immutable, inescapable, absolute. Yeah, I still don't get how, like, what does it mean? It's implicit in the whole it is. Like, I just didn't get that.
Well, just metaphysically given, it is what it is kind of what it's. I think it doesn't amount to anything more than that. It's given. That's how reality is. You can't do anything about it. It is what it is.
Okay, so he's just saying like it's a nice way to capture objectivist metaphysics. Just if you have knowledge of it, like you could just sort of capture it with it is. That's what he's saying basically.
Yeah, I mean, wishing it were otherwise or seeing it is that way, just there's nothing to change about it. But that's the metaphysically given. Like if existence exists, well, it just is.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Okay. Okay, I think maybe I get it. Like what we were talking about before about um, the primacy of existence as an elaboration on one of the basic axioms. It's the same concept here. Like you start with it is, and then all you're doing is you're just elaborating, right, in conceptual terms. But you're not giving anything a definition. You're just elaborating on direct observation.
Yeah, but at some point, of course, you'll have concepts of things, but ultimately existence, you're not having like defining it, you're just finding out more. And facts like existence exist. And that's absolute. There's, as far as the relevant circumstances, it's not anything else.
Yeah.
Like an apple falls from a tree, it just, there's no other way about that.
Is this concept of absolute, is that also an elaboration then on an axiom? Because it comes up, it's like I sort of get it. It just means it can't be any other way. But what else are you adding to that information? Like it comes up later too, where they use absolute a lot. Um, it's just another way to name something that exists, right? When you like, so here, even the title of the chapter was, or the section was metaphysically given as absolute.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is absolute they're adding? Because it comes up
Absolute,
later. That's why I'm trying to
that's,
get my head around it.
well, the immutability, the inescapability, that there's no other way. Like if I look at a tree and the leaves are green, like it's not, they're green. I mean, they're one color and that's it. I mean, of course you can be wrong about it, but the fact of the matter isn't going to change based on what you believe about it.
But okay, but what is absolute? Like, what distinction does saying it is absolute? What does it help me make? What, like, I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Like, I don't see, you just say it is there, but what is, if I say it is absolute, what information have I added to my
well,
observation?
you're saying it's not also like a green leaf isn't also a purple leaf at the same time and in the same respect. They can't be both at once.
So it's an
So
elaboration on the law of identity?
yes,
Okay. Oh, okay. So it is an
inherent in the law
elaboration
of
then, almost. Yeah.
yeah, I would say it is an elaboration, but in a sense, everything's an elaboration about the basic axioms. But
What do you
this is
mean?
closer to, I mean, like if you say that apples are red,
Yeah.
then that's part of reality. You're describing this is a thing in reality. Red apple is just there. I guess I could say that.
I'm going to write that down to think about later. Elaboration on basic axioms and elaboration.
In a sense that everything's connected.
Yeah.
Everything's connected to existence. So if you find out about apples, you've discovered something about existence.
Okay, so you've elaborated on. Okay, I get what you're saying. But
But you're still a concept, of course. I mean, yeah, it's an elaboration, but now it gets more and more complex, and we start to need additional concepts and ideas to describe more about existence without getting overwhelmed.
But yeah, okay. Actually, now that I think about it, well, we can make the distinction between the elaborations being done here and the elaborations you're talking about with the apple, where you might
Yes.
need, you need other concepts. Whereas in this case, and you have definitions and differentiators or whatever. Whereas in this case, you're just dealing with things that are like ostensive. So maybe in that sense, there's a distinction between the like absolute and say apples.
Yeah, but also absolute being that there aren't multiple truths, there aren't multiple facts about the same thing, like that are contradictory, or it's almost like the rules of logic. You can't just think that true, false, then both true and false, and neither true nor false. You can't be all those things at once.
Yeah.
And some Buddhist philosophers have said that things are either true, false, true and false, or neither true nor false.
That's confusing. I don't know
Which
what they're talking about.
exactly, that's confusing. Exactly, it starts to that's not metaphysically given as absolute. That's metaphysically given is flexible and fluid. That's the
Okay.
contrast you can make.
Got it.
And uh, what's in Nagarjuna or something like that? He's a well-known Buddhist philosopher from I don't know a long time ago, but yeah, that's the contrast you want to make it with.
Got it. Makes sense. Just seeing if I should race ahead or just maybe start wrapping up. Um, maybe we'll just wrap up because we've got like 10, what is it, like 12 minutes or something, not long. So we can just talk about
Yeah.
other things we need to cover.